Good morning, everybody. Oh. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Indigenous Services Canada COO side-by-side K12 Funding Formula side-by-side information sessions. Thank you for coming today. When everybody was checking in, you could tell some people were coming from near, but a lot from far, some adventures, some long travels, but we're glad you're here and you're safe, and we look forward to spending the day with you. So to start, I'm just going to go through how our agenda will unfold today. We've had breakfast already. I hope everybody has. If you haven't, there's still time to grab some breakfast in the back. We'll ask our knowledge keeper to come up to start us after I go through this agenda. We'll have some opening remarks from Ms. Susan Troniak, the Director of Education and Social Programs with Indigenous Services Canada. Then we'll jump right into our presentation. So at 9:15, there'll be a K-12 funding model presentation by Ramona Merritt and Christina Buzzy. At 10 o'clock, there'll be a side-by-side overview by our presenters again. We'll have a little break at 10:30. At 10:45, that presentation will continue about the side-by-side. And then at 11:30, they'll be going through a presentation on service mapping. Lunch is at noon. And then from 1 to 3:30, there'll be concurrent sessions. So there'll be an individual review of the side-by-side document. That's where if you signed up for a session, you'll be getting some time one-on-one with some of our ISC personnel to go over your personal side-by-side and ask them your questions. While that's going on, because we'll have the room divided in half, there'll be a K-12 reporting clinic presentation. And you don't have to sign up for that. So if you've signed up, so from 1 to 2, there'll be a personal side-by-side session, and then it'll switch up. And I think probably from like 2:15 to 3:15 will be a second run of the K-12 reporting clinic. So while you're in your individual one, there'll be a presentation, but you won't miss that presentation because at 2 o'clock we'll switch and you can take in that presentation. And then at 3:30, our very own federal lead expert, Angel Miracle from Chiefs of Ontario, will be taking you through a presentation on the Ontario Technical Table on the Interim Funding Approach, and then we'll ask our knowledge keeper to close for the day. So without further ado, I'd like to call upon our knowledge keeper, Elder Donna Dubosky.
Apojo, evde kweden yenindi konuşma ve kwenda ogi gondo dema web shikegin in genot magna. Evde kweden means the sound of the little thunders that come before the big thunders, and that's my spirit name that I was given by one of our elders. I'm from the fish clan and the turtle clan, and I represent the fish, so that our role is mediation, that sort of thing. So we sit between the two leadership clans. So I also want to do the Anishinaabe Nation, the Godeon Gisit Anishinaabe. This is our preamble that's contained in our Chinook Niyewin, which we recite at every meeting before we start, at every gathering. So it's called One Anishinaabe Family. Devin get Isa Anishinaabe na king, give it good God in the Watsuin. Shkoden Beke, no, then give it was on me now doing me, my pishkak me kong. Devin get give me none get stolen dog and Anishinaabe one out dodging, and then Nish was stricken about winning. Sagid win, Deboy win, not then moin, Boka win, but in this win, we got to win me no shock day win. Devin get Kimi on that we know we not doing the Capnadin down Nagabe Shwebak, Nango Mego Shwebak, Minage Yabe one Shwebak. So this speaks to how the Creator placed the Anishinaabe on Mother Earth, along with the gift of spirituality, and how we were gifted the responsibility to look after the fire, the water, the earth, and the wind, and how he also, the Creator, Debenchgate, also gave us the 7 sacred teachings to guide us, and that's love, truth, respect, wisdom, humility, honesty, and bravery. And we use these gifts to, in everything that we do with our families, with our communities, with our nations. It's guides that are put in place for us to observe. The Creator also gave us sovereignty to govern ourselves, and this is what we're working hard to make advances in through Anishinaabe Nation to go into different governance segments of our nation. And so we respect and honor the past, the present, and the future, because we always have to look to the past to be in the present and to know where we're going. So that's Ngodeangis Anishinaabe. And I'll also do an opening prayer. Naha deben chgen kin ta kinewa gashi toin kin kinewa deben man. Gosen mi gosan jibi wit bom yang jibi wido ku yang shinda na manchi diang. We ne sajin minok ni yang gishnat mo ang ni Anishinaabe nanik minoge na yabe wabi a chik makwen mananiki no panege mitish migwech chikiding. Migwech. Naha.
Yeah, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us here today. It is truly wonderful to be able to gather in person to talk about education, to talk about how the education systems are working for you, how we can assist you in advancing what you want to accomplish. It truly is wonderful to be able to stand up here and to the hugs I got this morning. Thank you, everybody. It has been a crazy few years for us. So I want to thank Chiefs of Ontario for working with us to organize this. We know it's important. We know virtual, even though holding the information virtually has helped, I think it's the in-person that allows us that connection and that ability to continue to move forward. I want to thank the elder for the opening prayer, for the opening comments. It truly is wonderful, and when she spoke about the 7 teachings, and I think about how that hangs in my house, and I look to it and I self-reflect every day. Am I following the teachings that I have been raised with? So it was really nice to hear that acknowledged. It is something that I keep close to my heart and try and maintain in my relationships across the board, right, with anybody I run into. We're so happy today. We have a couple of introductions for some fabulous team members. I encourage you to get to know them. So, during the breaks, during the lunch, come up, introduce yourself, talk to them. They are the backbone of the education funding within Indigenous Services Canada. And without them, I couldn't accomplish half of what you've asked us to accomplish. So I would encourage you to take some time to meet them during the breaks and the lunches. And we don't want to delay because it is a lot of information to be shared today, okay? So we'll try and really pay attention to the breaks because you're going to need them to be able to go outside, stretch, get some, reset your thoughts and come back to the table. So, because there is a lot of information being shared today. I will be leaving temporarily, but I will come back to join you as soon as I can. So if you're looking for me, just know that I should be back about 11:30 this morning. So without further ado, I do want to take the time to introduce, like I said, some fabulous team members. First and foremost, and she can kind of give away, Ramona Merritt. She's a senior education officer with Indigenous Services Canada. And I am telling you, this woman has invested a ton of time in understanding the formula and understanding the allocation workbooks. What she can't answer today, she will absolutely reach back out to you and delve into the details. So thank you, Ramona, for joining us today. Christina Buzzy. So Christina Buzzy has worked with the department for how many years now, Christina? Yeah, so for 5 years. So most recently, we have been able to welcome Christina Buzzy to our team as another senior program officer. So we have been able to retain her. So she is basically going to take the lead on certain files, but assist Ramona as well. So side-by-sides, education formula, education funding, these are the two individuals you want to connect with. And Christina comes to us from an amazing background, working with us for 5 years, so kind of understands through the ranks as well. And then last, but not least, looking at her, Rhonda Beauvais. She's our Manager of Education Programs with Indigenous Services Canada. And again, another phenomenal career. She has worked through funding services. She has a long-standing career in finance, and we just welcome her thoughts and sharing with us today. Yeah. Do you want to? No? Okay. Okay, so we're going to turn it over to Ramona. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we look forward to the discussions with you today. The presentation, is it on this laptop? So there's AV. Thank you. That doesn't look like the right one. That's the one for the afternoon. That's the right one, yeah. Christina, do you want to do the slides for Ramona? Are you guys sharing?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ramona Merritt. Thank you for having me here today. We have, the presentation is not really broken up as per the agenda. It's sort of one. We're going to go through the side-by-side as well as the narrative overview at the same time, showing you where you can find the specific calculations in the narrative overview. Okay, so starting in 2019-20, the new interim funding formula was introduced. So the interim funding formula captures students ordinarily resident on reserve and are attending First Nation or attending provincial private schools. At that time, we started creating what's called the side-by-side. In front of you, you have a blank side-by-side. This is just so you can help follow along. Individual side-by-sides will be available later on. Currently, side-by-sides are only created for First Nations. Other organizations were in the process of developing them, but they're not quite ready yet. So if you're to look at this year's funding is based on last year's nominal roll. So the nominal roll is done the last instructional date in September, and your nominal report's submitted, and it goes through a process. Once that's all finalized, it gets put into the formula, and your current year funding is calculated. So that's so your 2023 funding is based on your 2022-23 nominal roll. Once the calculations are done, a package is sent that includes an allocation letter, which outlines the funding that will be placed into your comprehensive funding agreement, and it will include your side-by-side as well as a copy of the narrative overview. The narrative overview has a big, long name, which is Ontario First Nations K12 Comparability Funding Model Overview. For simplicity's sake, we typically refer to it just as the narrative overview, but it is this big document, and there's several copies placed on each table as well. Pardon me? After the presentations, yeah. So what we're going to do today is this is the first session of 3. So we're going to go through it, probably make some tweaks depending on questions and what happens. And then we'll probably provide it, I think you said after the 3rd session in December, then we'll provide a copy to all participants. So we do have the participation list and all the emails, and we can send that out. Okay, so when explaining your elementary and secondary funding, we use 3 documents. We use the side-by-side, the allocation letter, and the narrative overview. So the side-by-side, so you all have blank side-by-sides on your desk. Thank you, Christina. So all First Nation information was removed from this one just so you can have a copy. It looks just like yours. It's a 5-page long document. The first page of the side-by-side, about a third of the way down, under interim funding forecast, is where your 22-23 nominal roll data is. So that should match the reports that would have been sent out in...
October 15th is the due date.
Okay, so, but when do they send the reports? When does the database officer send the final?
Probably December.
Okay, so starting around December, a report is sent by the database officer confirming your nominal roll. So that will match this portion of the side-by-side. When we're talking about your current year funding, I always start with page 3. So page 3 of the document has a numbering system from 1 to 33. During the presentation, this is going to be a little bit confusing, but Christina and I thought this might make the most sense. In the presentation, there's numbers beside the grants. It matches this. It doesn't match the narrative overview. It's something we've looked at in the future to line them up. The narrative overview counts them in order. It's a little bit out of order compared to this. So when you're looking at the presentation, it matches these numbers on here. So that's just a little side note.
Are there any extra copies of the side-by-side?
Yeah, there was a few. We have a couple here. Okay, thank you, Christina. Okay, so one thing to note, when we're sending out the elementary and secondary packages, currently, it's the terms and conditions of the comprehensive funding agreement. We are to communicate with chief and council. So the packages are sent to chief and council. That is our process to communicate with chief and council. As a courtesy, at times we do send to education directors, but not always. So sometimes funding letters are sent to chief and council, and that's why. It's a term and condition of the agreement. And as I mentioned, currently they're only created for First Nations only. Our headquarters team and Christina and myself have been working on creating it for all funding partners, but we're just not quite there yet. So on page 3, let me see, just see the next slide. Okay, so next slide. So page 3 of your side-by-side calculates the total funding generated by the interim funding formula. So this is all the funding that's generated for First Nation operated schools, provincial students attending provincial private schools, and other enhancements that have been included in the formula. The interim funding formula follows the provincial model, the grant for student needs. We do have a couple of copies of the grant for student needs here. It is a large document, so we only printed off 2, but we will have them available somewhere if you wish to look at them. So we follow the grant for student needs, and it applies proxies and notional school authorities where necessary. So it was adapted to First Nations. And because it doesn't adapt exactly, there were some assumptions and proxies that needed to be created to adapt the grant for student needs to First Nation funding. And a lot of that work is a direct result of the work held at the Ontario Technical Table Interim Funding Approach task teams. A lot of the work for that has been directly as a result of the hard work at those teams. So the grant for student needs includes funding calculations that are made at the school board level. So to apply these to the interim funding formula, First Nation schools have been grouped into notional First Nation education authorities, notional meaning theoretical, and they are based on geography and service centers. The notional First Nation education authorities include Brantford Bruce, Fort Frances, James Bay, Kenora, Lakehead, London, Nakina, Peterborough, Sioux Lookout, and Sudbury. They are on my, oh, you have it. Do you have the?
No, I could just take one out.
Oh, okay, okay. Proxy rates. The interim funding formula applies proxy rates based on 4 provincial school boards that are generally small in number of students and schools. They're northern and have a high dispersion factors. So the 4 provincial school boards are Keewatin Patricia District School Board, Northwest Catholic School Board. I'm gonna try to speak French. No, I'm not. Conseil Solaire de District du Nord de l'Ontario, Conseil Solaire District Catholique de Ore Boreal. My kids would be absolutely mortified. They both took French immersion, and they would just be like, yeah, don't speak. And every time I try to pretend, they're like, just stop, do not try. These proxy rate boards were decided upon early in the beginning, again, I believe in collaboration with the OTIFA tables. Any questions so far? Yes. So COVID is actually, the formula is included in line 17 of the blank document. It's called COVID-19 Learning Recovery Fund. So when the province made the announcement, the one thing about the interim funding formula is it's always a year behind. So it takes a year to get it put into it, and then it's just because this year's funding is based on last year's nominal roll. It's not only based on last year's nominal roll, it's based on last year's grant for student needs. So this year's formula is based on last year, so it is included in this year. So your side-by-side is broken up, and like I said, I typically like to use page 3. It's the page I use the most. And it's broken into sections. The top section is funding for First Nation operated schools. The second section here is for students attending provincial private schools. And then the next section is for transportation. It includes transportation for First Nation and provincial. Then we have private home placement, funding protection, funding stabilization, funding outside the GSN, and any additional high-cost spec ed addition, which Christina will touch on later. So the first 22 are the grants in the GSN that are applied to First Nation operated schools. And we're going to go through them again. The numbers on here line up with the numbers on here. We've also included the page numbers in the narrative overview for you as well. Next slide, please. We've had a comment. If you have a question, please just use one of the mics so that everyone can hear the question as well. Oh, sorry. So the first grant is the Pupil Foundation Grant. This is a per pupil allocation that supports the elements of a classroom education, so including salaries for teachers, things like that. And it's broken up into 5 specific rates. Kindergarten, JK and SK. Primary, grades 1 to 3. Junior and intermediate, grades 4 to 8. Intermediate, there's a supplementary grant for kids in grades 7 and 8 to help prepare them for high school. And then the secondary grades of 9 to 12. We do have the rates in the narrative overview. It's on page 13 to 14 of the narrative overview for the actual specific rates. We did, Christina and I did change the presentation a bit. When we first started the presentation, we were being very detailed. It was down to the penny, but we would have been here for 4 days. It's a very complicated, long process. Christina and I understand most of it. Ryan Orlando, our HQ counterpart, understands all of it. But we are able to help you break down each individual grant. Likely not today at the individual side by side, but in the future, if you have something you need help calculating and figuring out, just please let Christina and I know. Next slide. Number 2 is the School Foundation Grant. Oh, wait, stepping back one, sorry. So the Pupil Foundation Grant is multiplied by a specific rate. So it takes your nominal roll. Your nominal roll is broken down into the various grade levels. It takes a specific rate for those each grades. It's calculated as multiplied, and that's how that one is calculated. I got way too many documents in this tiny little podium. Okay, back to the School Foundation Grant. So the School Foundation Grant supports the cost of an in-school administration and leadership. So it's salaries and benefits for principals, vice principals, support staff, and school administrative purposes, supplies for school administrative purposes. There's 3 tiers in this School Foundation Grant: supported, distant, and regular schools. All First Nation schools are at the supported tier. It has in-school administration and a leadership allocation, library staff allocation, and parent engagement allocation. This is on page 14 to 18 of the overview. And this is also, it takes your nominal roll and it's multiplied by a specific rate. The supplemental grant is a big one, and this is the grant where we decided to kind of switch gears and change up how we were presenting the information, because this grant has a lot of calculations in it, and it would have been information overload. It's huge. Within this grant, there are 15 different grants that generate funding. So this one is a big one. And we are going to go through them individually, but not the actual calculation of them. So in the GSN, there's 15 supplemental grants that generate a significant amount of funding for provincial school boards based on the varying circumstances and unique needs of boards, schools, and students. These grants are designed to recognize the different levels of support required by boards to provide quality education in different locations, to respond to particular student and school needs, and support varying demographic profiles. So this is line number 3 on your side-by-side. You'll see there's dashes because it's just the header. So there's no funding for line number 3 on the side-by-side. Okay. Oh. Line number 4 is the special education grant. This grant provides additional funding for students who need special education programs, services, and/or equipment. It's made up of 6 different allocations, and they're listed there from A to F. We have the special education per pupil amount, differentiated special education needs amount, special equipment amount, special incidents portion, education and community partnership program, and behavior expertise amount. This one, so the first one, the SEPA and the BEA, are calculated differently than the middle 4. The first one, the SEPA, is the FTE, or nominal role, multiplied by a specific rate. The next 4 use one of the proxy school board amounts to calculate, to help apply the GSN to First Nations schools. And then the BEA uses the notional FNEAs divided by the total enrollment in First Nations schools. And this is, like I said, and this is the actual specific one that it was, I really, really wanted to show how each thing was calculated, but this was so big, and I think I was like on slide 8, and I was only on the 3rd one, and we really had to step back because it was just, it was too much information for one morning, in my opinion. But we can help you if you need that kind of breakdown. The next supplemental grant is the language grant. This grant supports the additional costs related to language instruction. This grant also includes 6 different allocations: English as a second language, English literacy development, program de pool au nouveau arrivant allocation, recent immigration supplement, French as a second language, French as a first language, oh gosh, actualisation linguistique en français. I took French to grade 13, which is very sad because I thought I was good at it until now. So this grant uses the proxy boards. So there's a proxy board rate, a per pupil amount that's multiplied by the FTE, or nominal role. Since the proxy boards are both French and English school boards, there's 2 of each, both of the boards also include immersion programs. All parts of the language grants are included. So they use the proxy board so that we could capture all various aspects of these 6 different allocations. Is there any more questions? Anything? Okay. Oh. Recent immigration. So that's just part of the GSN. So remember, the interim funding formula is adapted from the GSN. That's a line item in the GSN. So it's adapted to First Nation schools, and we've used the proxy boards to adapt it. The next grant is line number 6. It's the Indigenous Education Grant. This grant provides funding for programs and initiatives to support the academic success and well-being of Indigenous students, as well as build the knowledge of all students and educators on Indigenous histories, cultures, perspectives, and contributions. This supports elementary and secondary Indigenous language programs and is based on the number of students, the school board level, and the length of the program. Only Indigenous language programs offered during the school day are eligible for funding through this allocation. First Nation, Métis, and Inuit Studies allocation supports secondary Indigenous studies courses based on the number of students. The board action plan allocation supports the implementation of programs and initiatives aligned with the strategies and actions defined in the Ontario First Nation, Métis, and Inuit Framework Plan. So this one has a few different allocations within it as well. The Indigenous language allocation, some of it's used multiplying a rate by a specific rate, and then portions of it are use the notional FNEA. Geographic Circumstances Grant, line number 7. This grant recognizes the additional costs of operating small schools that are isolated and costs that are isolated with the geography of school boards, including school board size and school dispersion. This one also has 6 allocations, I believe. Yeah. We have a remote and rural allocation, supported schools allocation, rural and northern education fund allocation, additional software licensing, student technology devices, and broadband network operations. We often get questions for software, things like how do we get licensing, and this is where it's included. The funding for that is included in the Geographic Circumstances Grant. The Learning Opportunities Grant, line number 8. This grant provides funding for a range of programs to help students who are at a greater risk of poor academic achievement, including providing supports for de-streaming as well as learning recovery programming. There's a demographic allocation. It's allocated using socioeconomic indicators. Targeted student support envelope includes 4 allocations: literacy and math outside the school day, student success, grades 7 to 12, grade 7 and 8 literacy and numeracy and student success teacher allocation, and tutoring allocation. There's also the experiential learning envelope, which includes 3 separate allocations: specialist high skills major allocation, experiential learning allocation, and outdoor education allocation. The Learning Opportunity Grant is on pages 34 to 38 of the overview. The Learning Opportunity Grant, uses proxy rate based on average of budgeted learning opportunity grants allocated to proxy boards divided by the total. So that's how that one is calculated and adapted. Line 9, what time is it? 9:50. What time is break again? Sorry. Is it 10? Okay, we'll do this last one then, I guess. Is 10 o'clock the break? Sorry, I don't remember the agenda. 10:30? Okay, thank you. Line number 9 is the Mental Health and Well-Being Grant. This used to be called the Safe and Accepting School Supplement. This provides funding to foster the learning and well-being of students. It has 5 different allocations. Maybe we should switch these back to numbers so we can. Okay. The first allocation is mental health worker allocation, which is made up of 2 different components: mental health worker staffing component and data and information collection component. It has a supporting student mental health allocation, well-being and positive school climates allocation, safe and accepting schools allocation, urban and priority high schools allocation. This grant is explained on pages 38 to 40 of the overview. And this one uses the proxy rates, again, to apply it from the grant for student needs to the interim funding formula. number 10 is the Continuing Education and Other Programs Grant. This grant supports adult and high-credit day school programs and continuing education programs. A specific rate is multiplied against the number of adult students. There is a prior learning assessment and recognition allocation, international and Indigenous language program and elementary allocation, and international student recovery amount. This is on pages 40 to 41 of the overview. And this one uses a specific rate that's multiplied again by the nominal roll for those students. Grant number 11. Oh, sure. Yes, yes, please. Thank you.
With that one, the for the adult allocation grant, is that what would include the over 21 discussions that are going on now about what students over 21 in our day schools are?
So currently, in this year's formula, it's at the, it's how it's calculated now. Moving forward, yes, it will likely include either a separate line item. I'm not sure how it will look yet, but it will include a separate, it will be calculated differently for adults, effective, I think, April 1st of next year. But currently, it's just applied at a rate for those identified as over 21. And then it would have calculations for the additional allocations that were identified. So the program for adult education is changing, as we all know. What we don't know yet is what it's going to look like. And as soon as we know, we will share that information. Most of you would have participated in the adult education survey. The team has been working together to get those allocations together, and we should be sending out communications soon, eh, Rhonda? Is that one coming out soon? Yeah, so those that completed the survey should be receiving some information on this year's funding soon.
So question about the year allocations for that adult learning. Are you going to be extending it because we haven't actually started? Because we should be in year 2 of that adult funding formula, right?
No, so what happened was last year we had startup and expansion funding that was provided at the end of the year. So that funding was for communities and partners to start up or expand your adult education programming. An allocation was provided to all eligible First Nations and partners at the end of last year. This year, the approach was taken a little bit differently. It was based on the adult ed survey that was delivered around June. We had 5 sessions explaining the survey, and so we provided some information that way. And then again, it's for the expansion and startup, thank you, startup and expansion of an adult education program. And for those that were interested, obviously completed the survey. So that is just for that. It's not for the actual programming portion of it. It's for you to build or expand your program. This year, there's no additional adult education programming dollars in the formula. The process is being decided upon, and then next year, the funding formula will change to include adult education students. And then the startup and expansion is for 5 years, is it? And we're in year 3, 2?
I'd just like to clarify some of that because those discussions with the task team are ongoing.
Yeah.
And once those we agree upon the implementation, so the technical pieces, we're hoping it will be implemented for this year.
Oh, that would be great.
It's our understanding that as soon as we come to an agreement on how it's going to be implemented, then those learners over 21 will be on the nominal roll, will be funded at the new rate.
So for the 2022-23 nominal roll, adult learners that were identified, we will have funding in 23-24. That's great. So I didn't know that. I thought it was April 1st of next year. So that's great. Thank you.
The money's there and it's available. We just need to make sure that we understand how it's going to be implemented, and that's what we're working on at the task team with you.
Perfect.
And then, yeah, as soon as we make that decision,
Right.
whenever it's implemented, because that's now been
Right.
doing business.
So when something like that happens, there's an enhancement or a change mid-year. Once we get the calculations and we do all the work that we need to do, updated side-by-sides are sent out, and it would have like a whole new item, which would then, none of this will line up. When you're looking at your presentations later, nothing will match because there'll be a whole new line in there. So just to keep that in mind, and thank you, Angel, that's great news. I'm actually really excited to hear that, because I actually thought it was April 1st of next year. Line number 11 is the cost adjustment and teacher qualifications and experience grant. This grant provides funding for a variety of compensation-related funding adjustments for teachers and other staff. There are 8 different allocations within this grant: cost adjustment allocation, teacher qualifications and experience allocation, early childhood educator qualifications and experience allocation, new teacher induction program, teacher learning innovation allocation, retirement gratuities, benefits trust allocation, and teacher job protection funding. This grant is outlined on pages 41 to 44 of the overview. To apply this from the GSN to the interim funding formula, this one uses proxy rates, the proxy things on the notional FNEAs. I need some water. I'm thirsty. Next slide, please. The next line is number 12, student supports for student funds. This grant provides flexible funding for school boards to support the learning needs of students, which may include special education, mental health and well-being, language instruction, Indigenous education, and science, technology, engineering, and mathematics programming. This grant is covered on page 44 of the overview. The next grant is the program leadership grant. This grant provides funding to support the following 6 lead positions: early years lead, Indigenous education lead, mental health, school effectiveness, student success, technology enabled, and teaching contact leads. These leads are responsible for the organization, administration, management, and implementation of supports to achieve the goals within their respective program areas. This grant is covered on page 46 of the overview. Okay. Line number 14 is the declining enrollment adjustment grant. This grant provides school boards with transitional support, recognizing that it takes time for school boards to adjust their cost structures to reflect declines in enrollment. There are 2 components. The first year component is where the 22-23 average daily enrollment is lower than the 21-22. The first year of the enrollment, the first year component of the declining enrollment adjustment is based on the difference between the revenue calculated under the current year's enrollment and the projected revenue in the current year. The second year component is the calculation of the second year component is equal to 25% of a community's 21-22 first year component. This is outlined on page 56 to 57 of the overview. The declining enrollment adjustment is calculated by using the methodology from the Grant for Student Needs. The DEA is comprised of the two components, like I just said, so don't know why I was going to say it again, just because I like my own voice. Yeah, just further confuse myself. Want to do a couple? I'm going to take a break. No? Okay. Number 15, the School Board Administration and Governance Grant. This grant provides funding for administrative and governance costs, such as operating school board offices and central facilities, school board-based staff and expenses, including supervisory officers and their administrative support. There are 4 allocations within this grant: trustees allocation, student trustees honoraria, reporting entity project allocation, internal audit allocation. This grant is covered on pages 58 to 63 of the overview. This grant, to adapt this one from the GSN to the Interim Funding Formula, this grant uses the notional FNEAs to represent the school boards. The amounts are then distributed back to the schools and students comprising those FNEAs. Oopsies. There are other allocations to this grant. The board administration allocation, which is comprised of 10 core functions: Director of Education, Senior Administration, Director's Office, Human Resources, Finance, Payroll, Purchasing and Procurement, Administration and other supports, Information Technology, non-staff. There's an executive compensation allocation, a curriculum and assessment implementation allocation, central employer bargaining agency fees, school authorities amalgamation, and managing information for student achievement, local capacity building. So that one is a pretty big grant, and again, it's pages 58 to 63 of the narrative overview. And again, it uses the notional FNEAs. Okay. The next grant is the School Facility Operations and Renewal Grant. This grant addresses the costs of operating school facilities, things like heating, lighting, maintaining and cleaning, as well as costs of repairing and renovating schools. This one has 6 allocations, 6, 7, 8, 9 allocations. Christina and I thought it would make more sense if we numbered the line and then put A's and B's, and now I'm like, that doesn't make sense because now I have to count them. Do we have a question? Was there a question? No? Oh.
So with this example in here, because I'm going to follow along also, this example say, would it be assumed that this, if this was an example, that this community doesn't have a school? Because look at how small, because that would be if they had a school, correct? That grant? I don't know if anybody else has that thought. It's like 2,900.
I'm not sure, because I didn't look at the actual allocations for in here, like I didn't examine it that way, but typically, if you're on the top part of this with funding, I would assume you have a school.
Okay.
So why this particular example is so small, I would have to go into that. When you're looking at your individual side-by-sides when they come later on today, if you have any questions on that, please let me know. Because this grant is made up of 9 different allocations. And this would also then come from their, what's that report called that lists as A35A? Wouldn't that come from there?
Caius acres?
Yeah, wouldn't that?
Acres? Yeah. That's why I'm just, because as a educator, I would want to know where my O&M.
Right.
This would probably be that's where your O&M would be located.
Right. So the school facility and operations applies a rate per square meter to the size of each First Nations school based on the average per square meter rate allocated to school boards in a similar region to the FNEA. So you're right, I believe that would take what's in the acres report listed as an A35 or A35A asset. Sorry, I'm not capital, but it's something A35. And it would use that data pulled from that report to generate the funding. So there are 9 different allocations within this grant. School operations allocation, base school operations, enhanced top-up school operations, community use of school amounts, capital lease amount on school authority amalgamation, education and community partnership program, capital planning capacity, non-instructional spaces, school renewal allocation, which is made up of 4, the school renewal allocation is made up of 4 different components. The base school renewal, enhanced top-up for school renewal, enhancement to address deferred maintenance needs, and school renewal investment. So yeah, we'll have to look into that, Rhonda, to see why that amount is pretty small. Because even in the prior year, there's no amount. Any questions? So number 17, so this is where the question we had earlier about the province's announcement, I guess a year and a half ago for COVID recovery. This is where it is in our calculation. It's line number 17. So this grant provides temporary funding for additional staffing supports. The funding allows school boards to continue to hire teachers, early childhood educators, educational assistants, and other education workers to address the following priorities: learning recovery, implementation of the first year of a fully de-streamed grade 9, delivery of remote learning, supports for special education, enhanced cleaning standards. This is I guess, time-limited fund or time-limited grant. I believe in the I'm not sure which year it's being pulled out of the GSN, but it is being pulled out of the GSN. It's already this one? Okay. Thank you. To apply the COVID-19 recovery grant, it used the proxy board rates. Line number 18 is before and after school care. So this grant, or this enhancement, sorry, is to support First Nation operated schools on reserve and implementing before and after school care programming as an extension of in-class instruction. Before and after school care programming is to augment the scope of a First Nation school academic programming tied to instructional services in order to contribute to overall academic success. The Basque leverages existing school assets and academic programs currently under First Nation schools. This one is pages 67 to 71 of the overview. And I think that's it for this. And the before and after school came in 2021, 2022, I believe. Line number 19 is feminine hygiene products. So there was an announcement made by the government Ontario to address the issue of period poverty within schools. The interim funding model includes an enhancement to support access to menstrual products for First Nation students across Canada, and again, implemented in the 21-22 fiscal year. Line number 20 is band-operated student supports enhancement. This funding that was previously provided to support expenses typically incurred by parents of students in provincial school for services, products related to extracurricular and ancillary learning activities has been expanded to band-operated students in 22-23. These two enhancements are covered on page 72 to 74 of the overview. Number 21, employee pension benefits. The grant for student needs applies average employee benefit rates in the components where salaries and benefits are calculated. The various collective agreements in place between the school boards and the teacher unions set how much of the total grant is actually attributed to pension benefits. This is on page 77 of the overview. And the last line for operation of a First Nation school is the remoteness adaptation. Some First Nation schools and communities fall outside of the GSN comparability by being without road access, so they're fly-in communities. The interim funding model has been adapted to deal with this extreme level of remoteness for those communities. Each identified community is paired with its isolated post-allowance amount. There are 4 parts to this one. Part 1 is adapting employee salaries for the cost of living in a remote area. Part 2 is adapting operations and maintenance costs for the cost of operating a school in a remote area. Part 3 is providing travel amounts for out-of-community staff. And Part 4 is providing travel amounts for students in private home placements, which we discussed later on as well. The remoteness adaptations are outlined on page 77 to 81 of the overview. So aside from transportation, that is all of the line items for operating a First Nations school. So again, that's this top portion of the side-by-side. So if you have a First Nations school, that will include all the funding for the students on your nominal roll attending the school. Are there any questions?
So that's for First Nation schools that are on a First Nation, or does that also include a First Nation school that's operated but is off reserve?
So we call those private, First Nation private schools.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is that why, like, I'm from Batchewana, so is that why we wouldn't see any allocation in our side-by-side for the numbers, I think it was 1 to 22?
Correct.
Where our numbers would be all blank?
Right.
So that identifies that difference, right?
Yeah, because they're considered First Nation private schools.
Okay.
Right. Right. So that's why some calculations we have for before and after school care, the menstrual products are out. We also have an allocation for outside the formula so that those funds are also calculated for First Nation private schools and students attending provincial private schools as well. Okay. I need a drink. And how long are we giving? 20, 15, 20? Okay, so that is the top portion of the side-by-side, as I mentioned, for First Nation operated schools. That's the portion for, that's it for that. So I think right now is a good time to take a break. If you have any questions, please come up and see us, but otherwise we can come back in 15 minutes.